The grand hall of the palace was silent except for the heavy breathing of Princess Patricia. She stood before her parents, her hands clenched into fists at her sides, her heart hammering in her chest. The golden chandeliers above cast a soft glow on her face, but no light could mask the pain that had settled deep in her eyes. King Edward and Queen Margaret sat on their ornate thrones, their expressions unreadable. The air between them was thick with tension. "I have made up my mind," Patricia said, her voice firm yet laced with sorrow. "I cannot stay here any longer." Her mother's face fell instantly. "Patricia, you don't mean that," she whispered, gripping the armrest of her throne as if it were the only thing holding her upright. "I do, mother," Patricia insisted. "I have spent my entire life waiting for love, hoping that someone would see me. Not my wealth, not my title, but me. And each time, I am left with nothing but heartbreak." Her father's jaw tightened. "And what do you plan to do? Run away from your destiny?" His voice was stern, but beneath it, there was a layer of pain only a father could feel. Tears welled up in Patricia's eyes. "I want to go to another village. I want to live as a commoner. I want to see if love can find me without my name and fortune leading the way." The queen shook her head, disbelief etched into every feature of her face. "Patricia, my dear, do you understand what you're saying? You are a princess. You have never known hardship. That is the problem, mother." Patricia's voice cracked. "Men come to me with sweet words, but their love is for my wealth, not for me. The moment they get what they want, they leave." A thick silence filled the room. The king let out a long, exhausted sigh. "Is this about Henry?" Patricia flinched at the name. Henry, the man she had believed in, the man she had sacrificed so much for. She had used her wealth to send him abroad, believing he would return to her, believing that their love was real. But when he came back, he had married someone else, without a single word to her. A fresh wave of pain surged through her. "This is not just about Henry," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "This is about all of them. Every single man who has come into my life and left the moment they got what they wanted. I am tired of being used." The queen rose from her throne and walked over to Patricia, cupping her daughter's face in her trembling hands. "My child, please, don't do this to yourself." Patricia pulled away gently. "I have to, mother." The king stood abruptly. "And what if something happens to you out there? What if you fall into harm's way?" "I will be careful," Patricia assured him. "I will live simply. I will work. I will dress like the villagers. No one will know who I am." The king and queen exchanged worried glances. After a long moment, the king exhaled deeply. "If this is truly what you want, Patricia, then so be it." The queen gasped, "My king," but he only looked at Patricia, his eyes filled with a mixture of sorrow and reluctant acceptance. "We cannot keep her in a golden cage forever, Margaret. If this is the only way she will find peace, then we must let her go." A single tear rolled down Patricia's cheek. She had expected resistance, but now that they were allowing her to leave, the weight of her decision pressed down on her. The queen took Patricia's hands in hers. "Promise me one thing, my child." Patricia nodded. "Anything, mother. Promise me that no matter what happens, you will come back home when you need us." Patricia swallowed the lump in her throat and squeezed her mother's hands. "I promise." And with that, the decision was made. She would leave. She would start over. And this time, she would find love, not because of her wealth, but because of who she truly was. Patricia left the palace before dawn, slipping away in the quiet darkness of the morning. A simple car carried her belongings, mostly plain clothes, a few personal items, and the little money she had taken with her. The golden embroidery of her royal gowns had been left behind, replaced by long, unfitted dresses made of cheap cotton, the kind that hung loose on her frame, concealing her shape entirely. She traveled far, crossing rivers and dusty roads, passing through villages where no one knew her name. For the first time in her life, there were no guards following her, no royal maids tending to her needs. She was just another traveler, another woman seeking a new beginning. By the time she reached a small, bustling village, exhaustion weighed heavily on her shoulders. The place was simple, houses made of square red mud and thatched roofs, open markets with traders shouting over one another, and the smell of roasted corn and fresh produce filling the air. It was so different from the grand palace halls she had known all her life. She took a deep breath. This is where I will start over. The market woman. Patricia found a tiny room to rent, tucked away in the corner of the village, barely big enough to fit a mat and a small wooden table. It was nothing like the grand chambers she once had, but for the first time, she felt at peace in her own space. The next morning, she woke before sunrise, ready to begin her new life. She had spent part of her journey buying sacks of potatoes, cassava, and maize from traders along the way. Now, she would sell them. Dressed in one of her oversized gowns, a faded blue dress that swallowed her small frame, she carried her goods to the busy village square. She spread out a worn piece of cloth on the ground and arranged her produce in small piles, just as she had seen other sellers do. But as she sat there, waiting for customers, she noticed the way people looked at her. Some glanced at her clothes and whispered. Others smirked as they walked past. "Why is she dressed like that?" one woman murmured to another. "She looks like she's wearing a tent," a young boy snickered. Patricia pretended not to hear, keeping her eyes on her potatoes as if they were the most fascinating thing in the world. But inside, a familiar ache settled in her chest. She had spent her entire life being mocked for her looks, for being the ugly princess. Even here, where no one knew her, she could not escape judgment. Still, she refused to let it break her. A few hours passed before her first customer arrived, an elderly woman with kind eyes. "How much for a bowl of cassava?" Patricia smiled warmly. "10 coins, ma'am." The woman studied her for a moment, then nodded. "Give me 2 bowls." With careful hands, Patricia measured out the cassava and handed it over, accepting the coins with gratitude. It was a small victory, but it meant everything to her. As the days went by, more people began buying from her, though the whispers never truly stopped. She became known as the strange market woman, the one who dressed in big, unfitted clothes and rarely spoke unless spoken to. And yet, despite the quiet mockery, Patricia felt something she hadn't felt in years. Freedom. For the first time in her life, no one wanted anything from her. No one tried to get close to her for wealth or status. Here, she was just Patricia, the woman who sold potatoes and maize. And for now, that was enough. The days turned into weeks, and Patricia slowly found her place in the village. Her business grew as people realized she sold fresh produce at fair prices. She spoke little, but she was always kind. Over time, the villagers grew used to the strange woman in oversized gowns who sold potatoes and maize. It was on a particularly hot afternoon that she met Mike. She had just finished setting up her stall when he approached. Tall, with a confident stride, he had the easy charm of a man who knew how to win people over. His sharp features and neatly trimmed beard made him stand out from the other villagers, and when he smiled, his teeth gleamed white against his dark skin. "Good afternoon," he greeted, his voice smooth. "You're the new woman selling crops, right?" Patricia nodded. "Yes. Do you need anything?" He chuckled. "I was actually just passing by, but now that I'm here, let me buy some maize." She measured out a few cobs, and as she handed them over, he paused, studying her. "I don't think I've seen you smile before." Patricia looked away, uncomfortable. "I smile when there's a reason to." Mike laughed lightly. "Fair enough. I'm Mike, by the way. I own the barber shop down the street." Patricia nodded, expecting him to leave, but instead, he lingered. "Do you stay alone?" he asked curiously. She hesitated, then nodded. "That's brave," he remarked. "A woman living alone, doing business all by herself? That's not common around here." Patricia shrugged. "I do what I have to do." Mike smiled again before taking his maize. "I'll see you around, Patricia." And with that, he walked away. It started with small visits. Mike would stop by her stall to buy something, always finding a reason to chat. He asked about her day, joked about how serious she always looked, and made casual conversation that slowly chipped away at her guarded nature. Then he started bringing his best friend, Linus. Linus was shorter, stockier, and had a loud, hearty laugh that could fill a room. Unlike Mike, who was smooth and charming, Linus was straightforward and playful. "Mike said you sell the best maize in the village," Linus said one evening, grinning as he took a cob. "Let's see if that's true." Patricia couldn't help but chuckle softly as Linus bit into the maize and exaggerated his enjoyment. "Delicious," he declared. "I'll be coming here every day." From that day on, Mike and Linus became a regular part of her life. Soon, they began visiting her home. It started innocently enough. One day, Patricia was cooking a simple meal of yam porridge when Mike stopped by. "That smells good," he said, inhaling deeply. Without thinking much, Patricia offered him a plate. He ate eagerly, praising her cooking, and before long, it became a routine. Each evening, after closing her stall, she would cook, and Mike and Linus would come over to eat. Linus always joked that Patricia's cooking was the highlight of his day, while Mike would simply smile and say, "You're amazing, Patricia." And slowly, she began to believe it. Mike was gentle with her. He never rushed things, never forced his way into her heart. Instead, he made her feel special in ways no one else had. "You work so hard," he told her one evening as they sat outside her small home. "You deserve someone who will appreciate you." Patricia lowered her gaze. "People don't really see me that way." "I do," Mike said softly, reaching for her hand. Her breath caught. It was the first time a man had looked at her like that. Not with pity, not with mockery, but with something that felt real. And so, when Mike told her he loved her, she believed him. She gave her heart to him fully. She supported his barbershop, using the little savings she had to help him buy better equipment and improve his shop. She cooked for him, cared for him, and did everything she could to show him she was worth loving. For the first time in her life, she felt wanted. For the first time, she believed she had found love. All she wanted was to reveal herself to him. But Patricia did not know that love, when built on deception, always crumbles in the end. Mike had always played bets, but it was never serious. Small amounts here and there. Sometimes he lost, sometimes he won, but nothing life-changing. Until one evening, luck favored him. He had placed a bet with his last coins, not expecting much. But when the results came in, he had one. It wasn't a fortune, but it was more than he had ever held in his hands at once. Enough to make him feel like he had suddenly become someone important. He strutted into his barbershop the next morning with a new air of confidence, wearing a fresh shirt and a smirk that hadn't left his face since his win. Linus noticed it first. "You look like a man who just found gold," Linus teased. Mike laughed. "Not gold, my friend. Just stepping into a new level." Linus frowned. "What do you mean by that?" "You'll see," Mike said, a strange glint in his eye. That evening, Patricia was cooking, as usual, expecting Mike and Linus to come over. She had made his favorite, rice with spicy goat meat. But when Mike arrived, something was different. He leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed, watching her stir the pot. There was no warmth in his eyes this time. Patricia wiped her hands and smiled. "You're here. Food is almost ready." Mike exhaled sharply and shook his head. "I'm not here for food, Patricia. I came to talk." Something in his tone made her pause. "Is everything all right?" He laughed bitterly. "Yeah, everything is better than all right. That's why I can't keep doing this." Patricia frowned. "Doing what?" Mike pushed away from the doorframe and stepped closer. "Us. This relationship. I'm done." The words hit her like a slap. "Mike, what are you saying?" He smirked. "I've passed your level, Patricia. I can't keep pretending anymore." Her breath caught. "Past my level?" Mike sighed dramatically. "Look at you. Look at me. Do we match? Be honest with yourself." Patricia's throat tightened. "I don't understand." Mike scoffed. "You do. But let me spell it out. I was with you because I needed help. Now, I have money, and I don't need you anymore." Her hands trembled. "Mike, please don't do this." He let out a cruel chuckle. "You really thought I loved you? A woman like you?" Tears welled in Patricia's eyes. "Mike, I gave you everything, and I took it, and now I'm done." Patricia dropped to her knees. "Please, don't leave me." Mike clicked his tongue in irritation. "Get up, Patricia." She didn't. Instead, she clutched onto his legs. "Please, Mike. I love you. Don't do this." Mike's face twisted in disgust. Look at yourself. You're pathetic. Patricia sobbed against his knees. Please. I'll do anything. Just don't leave me. Mike pried her hands off him. Let me go. She shook her head desperately. With a grunt, he shoved her backward. Patricia hit the ground hard, her oversized dress billowing around her. People had gathered, watching the scene unfold. Some whispered. Others gasped. Linus, who had just arrived, rushed forward. Mike, what are you doing? Mike adjusted his collar. I'm leaving her behind. She's beneath me now. Linus grabbed his arm. Mike, don't do this. She doesn't deserve this. Mike yanked his arm away. She doesn't deserve me. I'm done with this joke of a relationship. And with that, he walked away, never once looking back. Patricia sat on the ground, trembling. Her entire body ached, not from the fall, but from the pain in her chest. That wasn't the first time. What had she done? What was wrong with her? Was she cursed? She thought everything had fallen into place, and now Linus knelt beside her. Patricia. She didn't look at him. I'm cursed. Linus frowned. No, you're not. Tears ran down her cheeks. No man has ever truly wanted me. They only use me and leave. Maybe I was never meant to be loved. Linus took her hands gently. Don't say that. You are not cursed, Patricia. You are kind, you are strong, and you are worth more than any of these men can see. She shook her head. Then why does this always happen? Linus sighed, his heart aching for her. Because you keep giving your love to people who don't deserve it. But one day, Patricia, someone will see you for who you truly are. And when that day comes, you'll realize you were never cursed. You were just waiting for the right person. Patricia looked at him, her eyes filled with pain and doubt. She didn't believe him. Not yet. But Linus did. And he would spend the coming months proving it to her. Patricia withdrew from the world after Mike's betrayal. She stopped cooking in the evenings. She stopped talking to people. She worked in silence, selling her crops mechanically, barely noticing when customers came and went. But Linus noticed. Every day, he checked on her. He would sit by her stall, making small talk even when she barely responded. If she didn't feel like eating, he brought food and sat with her until she took a bite. If she looked too tired, he helped her pack up for the day. You don't have to do this, Patricia told him one day. Linus shrugged. I know, but I want to. And slowly, she let him in. Unlike with Mike, Patricia never felt like she had to prove anything to Linus. With him, she could be quiet, and he would still sit beside her. She could be sad, and he wouldn't try to force her to be happy. He would just remind her that she wasn't alone. One evening, after closing her stall, Patricia finally spoke about what had been weighing on her heart. Do you think I'm ugly? She asked softly. Linus blinked, startled by the question. What? Mike called me ugly. People called me ugly. She swallowed hard. Maybe that's why no one ever stays. Linus exhaled slowly, shaking his head. Patricia, listen to me. You are not ugly. And if a man only values you for your looks, then he's a fool. She looked down. Then why does no one choose me? Linus reached for her hand and squeezed it gently. Not everyone in this world is blind, Patricia. One day, someone will see you the way you deserve to be seen. And when she looked into his eyes, for the first time in a long time, she believed him. Their friendship deepened. Linus became a part of her daily life, helping her at her stall, sharing jokes, and walking her home in the evenings. The villagers whispered about them, but neither cared. One day, as Patricia was rearranging her stall, Linus appeared, holding a basket. What's that? She asked. He grinned. I made you something. Patricia raised an eyebrow. You can cook? Linus laughed. Not really, but I tried. He handed her the basket, and when she opened it, she found a slightly burnt but still edible jollof rice. She laughed, really laughed, for the first time in months. Linus beamed. See? I made you laugh. That's a good sign. Patricia shook her head, smiling. You're impossible, Linus. But as she looked at him, something in her heart shifted. It wasn't sudden. It wasn't dramatic. But it was real. And before they knew it, they were in love. When Mike heard about them, he laughed. Loving Patricia? You've lost your mind, Linus, Mike sneered one afternoon when they ran into each other. I mean, I was with her for a reason. But you? What's your excuse? Linus clenched his jaw. Watch your mouth, Mike. Mike smirked. I mean, come on. She's… Linus didn't let him finish. With one swift motion, he grabbed Mike by the collar and pulled him close. Say one more word about Patricia, and I swear, you'll regret it. Mike's eyes widened. He had never seen Linus like this. Linus pushed him away. You might have been blind to what you had, but I'm not. Patricia is worth more than you'll ever understand. Mike scoffed but said nothing. And from that day on, Linus never let anyone disrespect Patricia again. Months later, under a bright blue sky and in the presence of the villagers, Linus and Patricia got married. There was no grand castle, no royal wedding like Patricia had once imagined as a child. But there was love. And as Linus held her hands, looking into her eyes, Patricia finally realized. She was never cursed. She had just been waiting for the right person all along. Linus and Patricia settled into their new life as husband and wife. Their wedding had been simple. No extravagant celebration, no royal trumpets or silk-lined gowns. Just love, laughter, and a promise to stand by each other. But as Linus swept the tiny porch of their home one morning, he had no idea that something was about to change his life forever. Linus sat outside his barbershop with his friends, chatting as he sharpened his tools. Some of the village men sat around him, sharing stories and laughing loudly. I still can't believe you married Patricia, one of the men teased, nudging Linus. Not that she isn't hardworking, but, you know. Linus lifted his gaze. I know what. The man chuckled, exchanging looks with the others. She's not exactly what men fight over. Another one smirked. You could have married someone finer, like that beautiful girl that was dying for you, or someone who turns heads. Instead, you chose? Linus's grip on his blade tightened, and his jaw clenched. You all talk as if beauty is the only thing that makes a woman valuable, he said, his voice calm but firm. But a beautiful face without a good heart means nothing. Patricia is worth more than any woman you think is fine. I love her, and that's all that matters. The men chuckled, shaking their heads, but before anyone could respond, something changed in the air. A loud gasp came from the roadside. A boy who had been playing nearby stopped, his mouth hanging open. People turned their heads, and suddenly, whispers spread like wildfire. Who are they? Someone asked. Is that a royal carriage? Another muttered. Linus frowned. Royal? Then he saw them. Two majestic horses stopped at the edge of the village, pulling a grand carriage. It wasn't just any carriage. It was the kind that only royalty traveled in. The royal crest shone on the door, glinting under the sunlight. The door opened, and a man in a golden robe stepped out. Gasps filled the air. It's the king, someone whispered in shock. Linus's heart pounded. The king? Here? He turned to see Patricia walking toward them, her basket of maize balanced on her hip. The moment she laid eyes on the visitors, she froze. Her hands trembled, and her basket slipped from her grasp, maize spilling onto the ground. She took a shaky step forward, her breath coming in gasps. Then, before anyone could react, Patricia dropped the basket entirely and ran. Ran toward the carriage, ran toward the two figures standing in front of it. And then, with a voice that trembled, cracked, and broke, she cried out, Mummy! Daddy! The entire village fell silent. Linus's eyes widened. His friends' mouths hung open. Patricia, their Patricia, had just called the king and queen Mummy and Daddy. The king and queen stretched out their arms, and Patricia fell into them, clutching them as sobs racked her body. The queen ran her fingers through Patricia's hair, whispering soothing words. The king, always a man of power, had tears glistening in his eyes as he held his daughter tightly. My child, he murmured. My sweet Patricia. The villagers watched, stunned beyond words. Mike, who had been standing nearby, took a slow step back, his face drained of color. Linus was frozen in place, his mind struggling to process what was happening. Patricia? A princess? His wife? Was royalty? Finally, Patricia pulled back, her eyes shimmering with emotion. She turned to the crowd, turned to Linus. She swallowed hard, taking a deep breath. "I never told you who I truly was," she said, her voice shaking. "I came here to find love, to see if someone could love me for who I am and not for my status. I hid my identity because I was tired of men using me and leaving when they got what they wanted." The village was silent, waiting, listening. Tears streamed down Patricia's face as she turned to Linus. "You loved me without knowing who I was. You protected me, stood by me, and never once made me feel like I was less. Linus, you are the man I prayed for." Linus's chest tightened. He took a step forward, reaching out. "Patricia." The queen turned to him, her eyes scanning him intently before she smiled. "You must be Linus," she said softly. "The man who loves my daughter." Linus nodded, still at a loss for words. The king stepped closer. "I have heard of men who abandon women when they have nothing to gain. But you chose my daughter without knowing her wealth, her title. You chose her for love." Linus swallowed. I do." The king placed a hand on his shoulder, his expression unreadable at first. Then, he smiled. "Then you are truly worthy of her." A long silence passed before the villagers erupted into excited murmurs. Mike, standing off to the side, looked as if he had been struck by lightning. Linus turned, and for the first time, he saw pure regret in Mike's eyes. But it was too late. Patricia was no longer the woman Mike had abandoned. She was a princess, and she had finally found love. That evening, a grand feast was held in the village in honor of the king and queen's visit. The villagers who had once mocked Patricia now showered her with admiration. They marveled at Linus, the humble barber who had unknowingly married into royalty. But as the night stretched on, as laughter and celebration filled the air, Linus and Patricia found a quiet moment alone. Sitting by the fire, Patricia turned to Linus, her eyes filled with gratitude. "Did you ever think," she whispered, "that the woman you fell in love with would turn out to be a princess?" Linus chuckled, shaking his head. "No, but I knew you were special from the start." She smiled, leaning her head against his shoulder. "You loved me when I was nobody. And now, no matter what happens, I will always love you." Linus wrapped his arm around her, holding her close. "You were never nobody, Patricia," he whispered. "You have always been a queen in my eyes." And as the fire crackled, as the stars shone above them, Patricia knew. She had found what she had been searching for all along. True love. Hello, champions. I hope you enjoyed our stories. Please hit the like button, leave a comment below, and subscribe to our channel. Thanks.